Hey everybody, I'm Chef Tom with allthingsbbq.com, and this is Savory Brisket Barbecue Beans. Well, today we're going to tackle a recipe that I've been teasing for far too long, and that's savory barbecue beans. Now, we've done sweet barbecue beans in the past, and they're delicious. We all like a nice sweet barbecue bean, maybe with some pulled pork or bacon in it. But sometimes you don't want all that sweet. Sometimes you want a little savory. So today what we're going to do is we're going to take a brisket flat, we're going to cube it up, smoke it over the top of some beans, let that fat drip in there while the brisket soaks up the smoke. Then we're going to chop that brisket, mix it into our beans. It's going to be delicious. Let's jump into it. All right, today we're starting with dry beans, so that's the first thing we've got to get going. I've got a pound of pinto beans here that I've rinsed. We're going to throw those into our Dutch oven, and then we're going to add essentially what we want to do here is boil these or simmer them to soften them rather than just soak them overnight, because it allows us to add more flavors. So there's any number of things that you could add to add some flavor to your beans. Today we've got some spring onions. We're just going to use the whites of those, and these I'll just split open but leave intact at the root so we can fish them out later. Also got a few cloves of garlic. These I'm just going to smash and peel. So we'll get the skins off of these so that we don't have to fish those out later. Basically, the smaller something is, the less likely I am to want to try and fish it out of the beans at the end. Get the garlic and the onion in there. And then we're going to make a little bundle of some herbs. So what I've got here is some fresh cilantro stems. But again, you could use anything. You could use oregano. We've got some thyme we're going to throw in here. We're going to put all of this together. We've got a bay leaf here. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to tie this up. Going to wrap our twine around it to hold it all together. And that way we can just pull all of this out all at once when we're done getting these beans tender. All right, so we'll throw that in there. We're going to top it off with 1 gallon of water. We'll throw a lid on this and bring it up to a simmer. Now those beans are going to need at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half to simmer and soften up enough before we can actually get them on the grill and start to smoke underneath the brisket. So we're going to give those about a 30-minute head start on everything else. In the meantime, we'll prep up the rest of the ingredients. So one of the great things about this recipe is you can kind of just use what you have on hand as far as this meat goes. So this is some brisket that has been sitting in the freezer for a while. Nice Creekstone brisket, but just some scrap pieces that we didn't use before. So you want to make sure you got some fat on it because that fat's going to drip into the beans. I've even just included a little cube of fat that's going to add some extra flavor to those beans. So what we want to do here is essentially cube everything up kind of like this cube of fat so that we can get lots of bark on this and they'll start to cook more quickly that way. So we're going to cut this into 1.5 inch or so cubes. This really helps with our timeline as well because we want these cubes to break down, not all the way. We want them to have some texture in the end, but we do need them to be tender enough that we can kind of chop them up and throw them in the beans by the time that the beans are done cooking. All right, so we're gonna hit this with a little bit of our jalapeno honey mustard. And this is one of 2 places where you're gonna see just a little bit of sugar added to this because we need a little bit of sweetness just to balance out the savory flavors. But for the most part, right here, we're using our mustard as a binder. So you could use just about anything you like. Regular mustard, oil, not super important, just anything to help the rub stick to the brisket. Now, as far as the seasoning goes, we're gonna hit this with our Trail Dust all-purpose seasoning today. Great savory flavors in here. You can see the mustard seeds. You've got some garlic, of course some salt and pepper. A little bit of thyme in there as well, which we see in the beans already. And I'm not gonna be super careful about getting every single side of this. We're just gonna make sure that we've got some rub on all of our cubes. Next, we're gonna move on to the ingredients that are actually going to be in the pot of beans once we get those on the grill. I've got about 8 ounces here of really nice thick cut bacon. This is going to be the fat that we put down into our Dutch oven before we get our veggies in there, just to get a little fat down, get a little flavor down. So once we get this diced up, we'll clean up our board and move on to some knife work on our veggies. Now we're gonna start our pot of barbecue beans just like we would any other sauce or soup with a nice flavor base. So we've already seen that bacon's gonna go down first. Next we need some aromatics and some flavors to really round out this savory barbecue baked beans. So what we've got, onions and peppers and garlic. How can you go wrong? Now most of these ingredients are essentially gonna melt down while our beans are cooking. So I'm just gonna give these a fairly thin slice to help that process along. For the peppers here, we've got one Anaheim, a poblano, and a jalapeno, but that's just for the variety. You could use whatever you like, even just some bell peppers if that's what you've got on hand. And of course, you can get rid of the jalapeno. If you don't like it hot, you could add a serrano if you like it hotter. I'll go ahead and leave the seeds in today, and we'll just slice this thin. It's a monster Anaheim. The thing to remember is the quantities aren't super important. This is your flavor base. You want a little less pepper in there, put less pepper in there. Not gonna hurt anything. All right, so next we've got some garlic. We'll take those stem ends off, and then we're just gonna slice these. Nice and thin, so they'll just kind of melt into everything else. Today we're cooking on the Yoder Smoker's YS640S pellet grill. We're running at 300 degrees. So we're essentially gonna set this up so that the brisket can drip right into the beans and the beans can be right over the flame. And we'll put this fat side down so that fat just drips down first. And with about 2.5 pounds of brisket here, you can kind of arrange these in the shape of your Dutch oven so that you catch all the juices and fat that drip off of it. But at the same time, leaving a little bit of room in between so you get some bark development at the same time. All right, so there's not much to do here. We're just gonna let these smoke away, start to develop that bark, bring the temp up. Well, the beans have been simmering away for about 1 hour and 15 minutes now, and they're right where we want them to be. So we're gonna take a look at those. Meanwhile, the brisket's been smoking for a good 45 minutes, starting to drop some of its juices. So we wanna make sure that we can get our beans started and the pot underneath. So these beans here, when we're checking for doneness, we don't want them to be complete mush, but they should have a nice give to them. So if you can smash them and kind of separate the halves, then you know where you're right in that right spot. So we're just gonna fish out like our herbs. We can take out all the green onions. I'm gonna go strain this off in the sink so that we're left with just the beans and none of the liquid. So we got the beans strained off, everything picked out of there. They're not pretty to look at right now, but they've got way more flavor in them than if we just opened a can. So now in the same pot that we were simmering those beans, we're gonna start to build our barbecue beans, starting with the bacon. We wanna get this rendered, get that fat out of there so we can start to cook the veggies in there as well. All right, so the bacon's starting to brown. We've got fat rendered out, so we're gonna go ahead and add now our peppers and onions. At the same time, we'll put a little bit of seasoning in there. That same seasoning that we used on the brisket, our cattleman's trail dust, and I'm gonna do about 2 tablespoons. So we want to let these soften up a bit. They don't have to get all the way there because they're going to stew and braise in that liquid on the grill, but we'll get them started. All right, so onions are softening up. We're going to add in our sliced garlic now. Just let that warm up a little bit. About ready to throw everything in the pot here. We're going to get a little bit more of this mustard going on now, about 1/4 cup. Just a touch of sweetness, some tanginess there. Got a couple tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. Let's mix that in. It smells incredible already. Let's go ahead and get our beans back in there. And then we're gonna cover this all up with about 1 quart of beef stock. Now that should come up just about to the top of the beans. We're gonna have a couple cups of water on hand to add to this as it's cooking down as needed. So we're just gonna bring this up to a simmer and then we're ready to put it on the grill. Well, that brisket's looking good. Getting some really great color on it. You see it's starting to render its fat, so we want to get this underneath there to catch all that. We're also positioning it so that, again, it's right above the fire so it gets some direct heat. That way these beans can kind of simmer away as this brisket just drops its juices and its fat above and into the pot. Well, our brisket's been on for a little over 2 hours now, and the color looks fantastic. It's come up in temperature. We're looking for about the 190, 195 range. We don't want it fall apart tender yet. We want it to have some bite to it. But what I'm aiming to do here is take this brisket off now, get it chopped up and worked into those beans. And so we're gonna add even more brisket flavor into those beans, but we want that brisket to have its texture. So come check this out. Just beautiful red color on these. Nice bark. And that's gonna hold up. As we chop this up and we make sure that it's not just falling apart, I mean, I can't squeeze this apart like you could a brisket slice or a burnt end. We're not gonna take it that far. This is where we wanna pull these off. At the same time here, we can slide this top shelf out. Oh yeah. See the beans just gently simmering away down there. Taking on that brisket juice. A little bit of smoke. Looking good. So one by one here, we're just gonna start dicing down our brisket. It doesn't have to be pretty or perfect, just give it a chop. Like I said, I want it to have some texture to it. Some of these smaller pieces, see like this one, has a lot more fat in it. That's just gonna melt away in our beans, and that's fine. Some of these larger pieces, they're gonna have a lot more texture to them, and we wanna keep it that way. All right, now all of this chopped brisket's gonna go right in with the beans. Now this is the part where you might need that extra cup or two of water. We want the beans to be thick, but we don't want anything to scorch here. Might as well give it a taste while we're here. Ooh. That's good. Those beans could get just a little bit more velvety, and I think that as it simmers with this brisket in here, we're gonna really see this broth kind of get creamier, especially as those beans break down. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more hot water and just let this simmer away for a little bit longer. Well, the brisket and beans have just been simmering away, and it's thickened up to the consistency that I'm looking for. So you can see how the starch from the beans is really broken down and it looks creamy. That's what I'm going for. We're gonna call this good. So we're just gonna add a little finishing touch here in the form of a savory barbecue sauce. We're using the Plowboys Casey Crossroad. This is something I would typically use on brisket if I was going to sauce brisket. And I don't love sauce on brisket, but this is designed as a tomato-based savory barbecue sauce, so it's not gonna add too much sweet. So I'm gonna add about 1/4 cup of this sauce. I don't wanna overpower it. I just wanna emphasize the barbecue on our barbecue beans. All right, let's get a bowl of beans. That smells incredible. It's gotta be crazy hot. I'm gonna do it anyway. Oh my goodness. I love beans, but sometimes barbecue beans are just too sweet for me, which is why this just hits it in the sweet spot for me. Not literally sweet. That brisket's still holding its form, but as soon as you put any pressure on it, it falls apart. The flavors are incredible. The onion, the pepper, this has got just a little bit of heat to it. And like I said, you can always leave that out by not adding the jalapeno. Just a touch of barbecue sweetness. It's smoky, it's full. I mean, it's practically chili. It kind of is chili. I mean, minus what we would usually have in the form of tomatoes and, you know, given that you're not in Texas. But it doesn't matter. What it is delicious. Texas or anywhere else, you're gonna love it. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out allthingsbbq.com for all the products featured in today's video. If you enjoy the recipe, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments or there's anything you'd like to see me cook, let me know in the comment section down below, and let's be good to one another. For more recipes, tips, and techniques, head over to allthingsbbq.com/thesauce. All Things Barbecue, where barbecue legends are made.